You know, I used to think getting old would happen slowly, quietly, like a whisper in the night. That one morning, I'd simply open my eyes, stretch a little slower than I used to, and realize, 68 now, retired, a widow, the mother of a grown son. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just a normal chapter in life. In my mind, old age would come softly, like a gentle fog settling over the hills of Horn Lake, the little town where I've lived most of my life. I imagined peaceful days, calm and steady. Maybe I'd spend time reading mystery novels, going on walks with my girlfriends, picking up a hobby or two, maybe even getting a cat to keep me company. I pictured a life where I was just another older woman in town, respected, not pitied, and certainly not treated like something fragile like a porcelain doll that might shatter if looked at too hard. But everything changed. It was one April morning last year. I was in my backyard, enjoying the first real warmth of spring, trimming my rosebush just like I had for years. The sun was soft on my skin, the clippers in my hand familiar. Then suddenly something was wrong. The world around me started to blur and spin, and my right hand wouldn't move the way it should. I looked down, confused. My fingers gripped the shears tightly, but I couldn't make them let go. It was as if my own body had turned against me. That's when my neighbor found me slumped near the flower bed and called for help. The ambulance came fast, but in that moment, everything I knew, my sense of independence, my routine, my control broke into two pieces. Before and after. Microstroke. Two small words, but when the doctor said them, it was like he was telling me I'd just dodged a bullet. He smiled with relief, as if I'd won a prize. "You're lucky, Mrs. Tremblay," he said. "We got you in time. You'll make a full recovery. Just make sure to take care of yourself. Take care of yourself." If I had known those 4 words would become a kind of curse repeated again and again like a warning bell, I might have begged that doctor never to say them in front of my son. Randall Tremblay. Randy, my only son. He's always been a bright boy, full of imagination, sensitive. When he was small, he was scared of just about everything. The dark, strangers, loud noises. My late husband, James, used to worry that Randy would grow up soft or fearful, but I didn't see it that way. I saw a gentle heart, a cautious mind. Now, though, looking back, I see it more clearly. It wasn't just sensitivity. It was a deep fear of losing control. A fear that only grew stronger with time. By the time he turned 42, Randy had turned that fear into a way of life. He ran his world like a clock. Everything in its place. Breakfast at exactly 7 a.m., evening walks at 7 p.m., no matter the weather. He married later than most at 39 to Laurel, a woman who seemed to share his love for neatness and rules. Their life was structured, ordered, predictable. And then I became the one variable that didn't fit into the plan. After the microstroke, I was in the hospital for only 3 days. I thought that was a good sign that I'd go home, rest a little, and slowly get back to normal. But Randy had other ideas. He wanted me to move in with him and Laurel right away. I said no. You see, my home isn't just a building. It's the last piece of the life I built with James. Every wall, every corner holds a memory. There's the painting we bought together on our 20th anniversary in Santa Fe. That chair by the window? That's where James used to sit every evening with his newspaper. And the kitchen, our kitchen, was where we spent years cooking Sunday dinners for the family. How could I just leave all of that behind? At first, Randy accepted my choice. He started visiting every day, bringing groceries, making sure I took my medicine on time. Laurel even pitched in, cooking meals and freezing them in labeled containers. I was grateful for their help, though it felt a little strange. I'd always been the one doing the caring. First for James and Randy, then later for all the children I taught at the elementary school. Switching roles, being the one cared for Dash felt off, like wearing someone else's shoes. But slowly, their help became something else, something tighter. More like control. Randy started pointing out things he hadn't before. A pot left on the stove, the iron plugged in, a pill missed. Yes, I forgot a few things here and there after the stroke. My memory wasn't quite the same. Sometimes I'd lose track of the days or buy milk twice. But that didn't mean I couldn't live my life. "Mum, this isn't safe," he told me one day, after finding the oven still warm. "What if there's a fire?" I looked him in the eye. "I haven't had a fire in 40 years, Randy. I don't think it'll start now. But it could happen," he said. And I heard it again, that scared little boy, hiding under his covers, terrified of something bad sneaking in. Only now, his fear had a grown-up name. Safety. I didn't realize then just how far things would go. It started small. My car keys vanished. Randy said the doctor advised against driving for a while. I agreed, thinking it was temporary. But then came the gadgets, a smart thermostat I couldn't adjust, cameras in my kitchen and living room, just in case. I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. Watched, monitored. Laurel soon stepped in with her own ideas. She called it simplifying. She threw out half my wardrobe, too many buttons, too hard to put on, she said. Rearranged the furniture so I wouldn't bump into things. Replaced my china cups with plastic ones. "We're just trying to make life easier for you," she said, smiling that sweet, sugary smile that never reached her eyes. "Randy worries so much about you, Meredith." She never called me Mom, not even once. Always Meredith, like I was a guest. No, not even that. Like I was someone to manage, not family. What stung most was how they made decisions for me, about me, but never with me. As if I didn't have a voice. As if I didn't matter anymore. Things came to a climax last week when Randy and Laurel came to me with wonderful news. They were sitting at my kitchen table, holding hands like teenagers on a first date, and smiling so wide it made me uncomfortable. "Mum, we won the cruise," Randy announced. "A 2-week trip to the Caribbean. Can you believe it?" Slapping my palm on the table. "I'm not a child or an incapacitated old woman. I've lived in this house for 40 years and I'll be fine for another 2 weeks without your supervision." Randy looked at me with the kind of condescending pity usually reserved for cranky children. "Mom, we know that's what y'all think, but the facts say otherwise. You forget to take your medicine. You get lost in the street. You leave appliances. Isolated incidents." I objected. "Everyone has moments of absent-mindedness. That doesn't make me dangerous to yourself," Laurel finished for me. "I'm sorry, Meredith, but that's exactly what's happening, and we can't let you risk your life because of stubbornness." I looked at them, at my son, who had once looked at me with adoration, but now saw only a problem to be solved, at his wife, who had never hidden the fact that she saw me as a burden. And in that moment I realized that I had lost the battle before it even began. But I wasn't prepared for what happened the next day. Randy arrived alone without Laurel. He looked determined and detached, as if preparing for an unpleasant but necessary procedure. "Mom, we've made a decision," he said without even sitting down. "For your safety, I'm going to lock you in the house while we're gone." I thought I'd misheard. "What did you say?" "I'll install new locks that can only be opened from the outside. A social worker will come twice a week. Meals will be delivered regularly. You'll have a home phone for emergencies. It's the safest option." I stared at him, not believing my ears. My own son was going to turn my house into a prison and me into a prisoner. You can't do this, I whispered. It's illegal. It's for your protection, Mom said, not looking me in the eye. I'm your next of kin, and I'm responsible for your well-being. If anything happens to you while we're away, I'll never forgive myself. There was so much confidence in his voice, so much unwavering belief that he was right. It took my breath away. How did we get to this point? How did my loving son become a jailer? Randy, please. I tried to take his hand, but he pulled away. We can find another solution. I promised to be careful to take my medication on time. It's already been decided. He cut me off. Tomorrow I'll bring a handyman to change the locks. Laura will make a medication schedule and a grocery list for delivery. Everything will be fine, Mom. It's only for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of confinement. 2 weeks without being able to go out of the garden, to walk to the park, to visit her friends. 2 weeks of complete helplessness and dependence on the mercy of others. I felt something inside me break. Not pride. It had long been trampled by their care. Something deeper, more fundamental. My belief that I was still a human being deserving of respect and the right to make my own decisions. Go away, I said quietly. Mum, get out of my house, Randall. Now. He looked at me with the same look of pity and annoyance I'd grown accustomed to, and headed for the door. I'll be back tomorrow with the master, he said, turning around. Try to understand, Mother. It's the only way to keep you safe. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time trying to realize what was happening. My son, my only child, was going to lock me in your home, and there was nothing I could do about it. Or could I? I looked at the picture of James standing on the mantelpiece. My husband never backed down in the face of adversity. If you're backed into a corner, Mary, he often said, don't give up. Look for a way out, even if there seems to be none. In that moment I realized that he wasn't going to let them turn me into a helpless child. I would find a way to prove that I was still capable of making decisions and taking responsibility for them. And if that meant going against my own son, then so be it. The day of their departure was surprisingly sunny for October. The morning in Horn Lake greeted me with a piercing blue sky and golden light streaming through the lace curtains. At another time, I would have gone out into the garden with a cup of coffee, admired the last of the fall flowers, maybe pruned the wilting chrysanthemums. But today, every glint of sunshine seemed to mock my situation. I'd stayed up all night, replaying our conversation with Randy last night in my head. Part of me still hoped he'd change his mind, that it was just an empty threat brought on by excessive worry. But deep down inside, I knew my son doesn't throw words to the wind, especially when it comes to his plans and decisions. At exactly 9 a.m, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang 3 times, jerky like Randy always did. I didn't move, continuing to sit in the living room chair. Let him use his key. At least let it make him feel like he was invading my territory. The door opened and I heard voices. Randy, Laurel, and someone else. A third male, unfamiliar one. Probably the locksmith my son was talking about. Mum, Randy called out as he came into the living room. You didn't answer their phone. I was worried. I looked up from the book I was holding in front of me, but I wasn't reading it. You're going to at me in my own house, Randall. What does it matter if I answer the phone or not? He wrinkled his nose, not at my words, but at my tone. Randy always hated it when I called him by his full name. It had been a sign of my displeasure since he was a baby. Don't be dramatic, Mom. We're not locking you up. We're keeping you safe. Call it whatever you want. I put the book down and stood up. It doesn't change the point. Laurel walked into the living room as flawless as ever. Perfectly styled blonde hair, beige pantsuit, minimal makeup, emphasizing a cold beauty. She was followed by a stocky middle-aged man carrying a large tool case. "Good morning, Meredith." Laurel said hello with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is Mr. Patterson. He's going to help us with the locks." "Hello, Mrs. Tremblay." The foreman nodded, clearly feeling uncomfortable. "I'll do my best to make it quick and neat." "I'm sure you're a professional, Mr. Patterson," I replied, trying to make my voice sound normal. "But I have to ask, do you often install locks that can only be opened from the outside?" That turned the house into Aprison. The master cast a worried glance at Randy, who hurried to intervene. "Mom, stop it. Mr. Patterson, please start with the front door. Then we'll do the back door and the garage door." The foreman nodded with relief and quickly went out into the hallway. Laurel followed him, casting a disapproving glance at me. Randy and I were left alone. "Why are you doing this?" he asked with that look of tired irritation he got whenever I disagreed with his decisions. "Why can't you just accept our help?" "Help?" I felt a wave of anger rising in me. "You call this help? Locking your own mother in the house like a criminal or a mental patient? You're exaggerating." "No, Randall, you're exaggerating. One microstroke, a couple cases of forgetfulness, and suddenly I can't take care of myself. Unable to live 2 weeks on my own." Randy took a deep breath, clearly trying to remain patient. "Mom, we've had this discussion before. You didn't just have a couple instances of forgetfulness. You've forgotten your way home from the supermarket where you've gone hundreds of times. You forget to take your medication. You leave the stove on. It's not just absent-mindedness. It's dangerous. Is that why you decided to let me up?" "I decided to protect you." His voice got higher. "Why can't you understand that? What if you get lost? Again? What if you forget to take your medicine for days on end? What if I die while you're having fun on a cruise?" I interrupted him. "Is that what's bothering you, Randy? That your flawed mother will ruin your vacation with her death?" My son's face contorted with pain and anger. "How can you say that? Do you think it's easy for me to make these decisions? You think I want to control your every move? Don't you?" I asked quietly. "Isn't that what you've been doing ever since I left the hospital? Controlling where I go, who I meet, what I eat, what medications I take. You even control my clothes through Laurel. That's called caring, Mom." "No, Randall. It's called control, and that's the problem. You can't tell the difference." We stood across from each other, two stubborn Tremblays who wouldn't give in. I could see the same stubbornness in his eyes that was probably reflected in mine. James had always laughed at our resemblance, saying that Randy had inherited not only me green eyes, but my temper as well. The sound of a drill came from the hallway. Mr. Patterson was getting toe work. The sound reminded me of the dentist's office. The same helplessness, the same sense of inevitability. "Please, Randy." I changed tactics, making my voice sound softer. "Let's find another solution. I can move in with you for these 2 weeks, or we can get Mrs. Fletcher's roommate to look after me." "Mom," Randy shook his head. "The decision has already been made. The locks are being changed. Laurel and I have organized everything. Don't do this," I said, a pleading note in my voice against my will. "Please, son." Something flickered in his eyes. Doubt? Regret? But it quickly faded. "It's for your own good, Mom," he repeated, looking away. "You'll realize that soon enough." I was about to say something else, but Laurel came back into the living room with a large folder in her hands. "Randy, help Mr. Patterson with the second door, and I'll explain to Meredith how this is going to work." she said in a business-like tone. My son nodded with obvious relief and walked out. L'Oreal sat down on the couch and opened a folder full of whole sheets. I've made a detailed plan for the entire 2 weeks, she began without looking at me. Breakfast, lunch and dinner will be delivered daily from a catering service called Homeward Bound. I've selected the meals with your diet and preferences in mind. She handed me a sheet with the meal schedule and menu. I took it without looking at it. The medications are organized by day and by appointment, Laurel continued, pointing to a plastic container with compartments. Each compartment has a time written on it. An electronic alarm clock will remind you of your appointments. The social worker, Mrs. Donovan, will come on Tuesdays and Fridays. Here are her contacts. She handed me a business card. I watched insolence as Laurel methodically laid out her monitoring system in front of me, packed in neat folders and containers. She didn't even notice that I wasn't saying a word, completely absorbed in her organizational process. In their refrigerator, I organized the groceries into shelves. The top one for breakfast, the middle one for lunches, and the bottom one for dinners. Everything is signed and dated. Try not to mix it up. She spoke to me as if I were a little girl or a feeble-minded old woman. Every word she said was laced with condescend, every gesture with blatant superiority. I made a list of emergency numbers. Laurel put another sheet of paper on the coffee table. It'll hang next to the home phone. We're taking the cell phone. You won't need it, and you often forget to charge it. I clenched my fist so hard that my nails dug into my palms. The pain helped me keep quiet. I knew that if I started talking, I wouldn't be able to hold back. There will be limitations with the computer too, Laurel continued, not noticing my condition. Randy had set it up so that you could only use the basics. Email to contact us and a few websites to read the news. Noonline shopping, no forums or social networking. You're too trusting, Meredith. And the internet is full of scammers. I felt something inside me tearing the last thread of patience. That's enough, I said, standing up. I'm not listening to this. Lavra looked up at me in surprise. Meredith, I'm not done explaining. And I'm done listening. I cut her off. You and Randy have already decided everything. You're turning my house into a prison and mine to a prisoner. I get it. You don't have to waste any more of your valuable time with further explanations. She pressed her lips together, clearly unhappy with my reaction. We're doing this for your own good. If you were more cooperative. I almost laughed. You want me to agree to house arrest with a smile? To thank you for depriving me of my last shred of autonomy? You're exaggerating as usual. Laurel sighed. It's a temporary measure. Just for 2 weeks. 2 weeks now, then 2 more weeks, then a month. Where's the guarantee that when you and Randy get back from the cruise, you won't decide it's safer for me to stay locked up forever? Something akin to guilt flashed in her eyes, and I realized I'd hit the mark. They'd already discussed that possibility. Oh my God, I whispered, taking a step back. You were really planning this. Meredith, calm down. Laurel stood up, holding out her hand as if trying to steady me. No one's talking about forever. We were just discussing different options for long-term care given your condition. My condition. I felt my hands shaking. My condition is being the mother of a son who locks me in my own home. It is to be the mother-in-law of a woman who treats me like my condition is to be a person whose dignity is trampled upon by hosts who should have loved and respected me. At that moment, Randy came back into the living room, attracted by me screams. What's going on here? He asked, looking from me to my wife. Your mother threw a tantrum, Laurel replied coldly. I was just explaining to her how everything was going to be organized, and she started screaming. I wasn't throwing a tantrum, I objected, feeling a helpless rage wash over me. I was expressing my disagreement with what you were doing to me. Mom, Please calm down. Randy came over to me and tried to take my hand, but I yanked it away. You're just confirming that you can't control your emotions. It's part of your condition. My condition. I couldn't believe my ears. What condition? Randall, I had amicrostroke. Not a psychotic break. I'm sane, and I have a right to be angry when I'm locked in my own house. See. Randy Laurel intervened. She doesn't realize her condition. Dr. Harris warned me that this could be a symptom. I looked at both of them, my son and his wife, standing shoulder to shoulder against me, discussing me as if I were an unreasonable child or worse, a thing without feelings or opinions. Get out of me room, I said quietly. Both of them now. Mom, get out, I screamed, unable to hold back any longer. Do what you want with the locks, the computer, the phone. Turn my house into a prison, but at least leave me alone until you leave. Randy and Laurel exchanged concerned glances. Then my son nodded. Okay, Mum. Well, finish getting ready and leave you to rest, but please try to calm down. It's not good for your blood pressure. They left the living room, closing the door quietly behind them, and I sank into the chair, shaking with anger and humiliation. From the hallway came their muffled voices, the sound of tools working, footsteps. They continue to methodically strip me of my freedom, and I sat in my living room, powerless to change anything. The next few hours passed like a blur. I could hear Laurel fiddling in the kitchen, putting food on the refrigerator shelves, Randy setting up my computer, setting some kind of limits. I didn't leave the living room, not wanting to see them turn my house into a cage. Toward lunchtime, Randy knocked on the living room door. Mum, we're almost done. Mr. Patterson has already left. All the locks are set. Would you like to have lunch with us before we leave? I didn't answer. I couldn't bring myself to speak to him in a normal tone of voice. Mum, I know you're upset, he continued after a pause. But trust me, it's for your own good. When we get back, you'll see for yourself that it was the right decision. I remained silent, staring out the window at my garden where the autumn wind was, whirling the fallen leaves. Okay. Randy sighed. I'll leave you, tourist. We leave in an hour. Laurel made dinner. It's in the kitchen. Please don't forget to eat. I heard his retreating footsteps and closed my eyes, trying to hold back the tears. I didn't want him to see me crying. I didn't want to give him another reason to think I was weak and unable to take care of myself. After a while, I heard the sounds of packing, the rustling of clothes, the jingling of keys, quiet conversations. Then there was silence, broken only by the ticking of the old wall clock, a wedding present from James's parents that measured our 40 years together. Suddenly, the living room door opened, and Randy appeared on the doorstep. He was already in his jacket, keys in hand. Mum, we're leaving, he said in an official tone. Everything is organized as we discussed. Food delivery will begin tomorrow. Morning, Mrs. Donovan will come on Tuesday. All the emergency numbers are next to the phone. We'll call every day. I looked at him in silence, at my only son, whom I once held in my arms. Whose first steps and words were the happiest moments of my life. What happened to that little boy who looked at me with adoration? When did he turn into this cold, controlling man? Is there anything you need before we go? Randy asked, clearly uncomfortable with my silence. Freedom? I finally answered. Give me back my freedom, Randall. His face tensed. Mum, we've talked about this. It's not forever, just for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of unfreedom is still unfreedom. Randy sighed with the look of a man who had run out of patience. I'm not going to discuss this again. We've made up our minds. Yes, you have. Without me, for me. Like I don't exist anymore. Mum, Stop being so dramatic. Something in his tone, in that condescending stop dramatizing, was the last straw. How dare you? I stood up, feeling the anger give me strength. How dare you lock me in my own house and then accuse me of being dramatic? You take away the last thing I have left, my independence, my dignity, and expect me to silently accept it. I expect you to be reasonable. Randy raised his voice. That you'll finally realize that you can't live alone. I lived alone for 10 years. After your father died, I yelled back, and I was perfectly happy until you and Laurel decided you knew better what I needed. Because you've changed, Mom. Randy raised his voice too. You're not the same person you used to be. You forget things. You get lost. You don't take care of your health. What if you leave the house and get lost? What if you fall and you can't call for help? It's my risk, Randall. It's my choice, my life. And who's going to deal with the consequences if something happens to you? Yeah, always me. He was practically yelling. You're not to be seen by any Oni until we get back from the cruise. And don't try to get out. You won't make it anyway. There was a deafening silence. Randy stared at me wide-eyed, clearly shocked by his own outburst. I took a step back, shocked by the force of his anger. Laurel appeared in the doorway, attracted by our screams. What's going on? She asked, shifting her gaze from me to her husband. Randy took a deep breath, trying to pull himself together. Nothing, he finalized. We're leaving right now. He turned and walked quickly out of their room. Laurel gave me one last look, a strange mixture of triumph and pity, and followed him. I heard them leave the house, the front door close, the car start, and then there was silence. The absolute silence of the empty house. I was locked in. Slowly, as if in a dream, I walked to the front door and tried to open it. It didn't work. The new lock was secure. I walked through to the kitchen to the back door. Same thing. The door to the garage wouldn't budge either. I was trapped in my own house like a bird in a cage. The first wave of panic came over me. I rushed to their phone thinking of calling who? The police, and say what? That my son locked in for my own safety. They'd probably believe him over me, especially if Randy showed them my medical records, told them about the microstroke, the instances of forgetfulness. I sank down in my chair, feeling the tears streaming down my cheeks. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to truly cry. From anger, from humiliation, from helplessness. I cried until there were no tears left. Until my eyes started to water and my throat was dry. Then I just sat staring out the window at my garden. Inaccessible now, like a distant planet. The sun was slowly slipping toward the horizon, the shadows lengthening, and I sat there in despair. I don't know how much time passed. Maybe an hour, maybe 3, when I suddenly noticed a small bird on the windowsill, just an ordinary sparrow. Unremarkable dot, it hopped along the windowsill, turning its head to one side and another, as if studying me through the glass. Then, as if satisfied with what he saw, he spread his wings and flew away. And then it hit me. I could sit here and feel sorry for myself, having spent these 2 weeks in despair and despondency. Or I could use this time to prove to myself that I was still capable of making decisions and taking responsibility for them. Yes, I'm locked in. Yes, my freedom is limited, but my mind still belongs to me. My will is not broken. And maybe there is a chance in this forced isolation. A chance to find a way out. A chance to prove that I am stronger than they think. I rose from my chair, wiped away the rest of my tears, and straightened me back. James always said that real strength came not when things were going well, but when it seemed like there was no way out. Well, it was time to test how strong I was. Started with a thorough inspection of the house. Every door, every window, every possible exit. Randy was thorough. All the windows were closed with new sturdy locks. All the doors securely locked. He'd even locked the attic hatches if he expected me to try to escape through the roof. But every system has a weakness. You just have to find it. Andy had plenty of time to look. The third day of my confinement was rainy. Drops droomed on the roof, sliding down the window panes, creating the illusion of tears, as if the house itself were mourning my plight. I wandered aimlessly from room to room, trying to find something to do that would take my mind off the confined space. The social worker, Mrs. Donovan, wasn't due until tomorrow, and the food delivery had already taken place early that morning. The young man in the raincoat had left the bags at the door, and left without even waiting for me to open it. Apparently, Randy had alerted the delivery service to my special condition. There was suddenly nothing to do in the house where I had lived most of my adult life. TV was no fun. Their news was annoying. Soap operas seemed empty, and travel documentaries only emphasized my unfreedom. The computer, limited by Ree's efforts, only allowed me to check my email, which was empty except for advertising newsletters, and browse a few news sites. In desperation, I decided to take up cleaning. Not because the house needed it. I've always kept it clean, but because physical activity helped with the growing sense of claustrophobia. I started in the kitchen, then moved on to the living room, bedroom, bathroom. When I reached James's study, I stopped in indecision. Since my husband's death, I'd rarely gone into that room. There were too many memories, too much pain of loss. James died suddenly. A heart attack took him in an instant. 10 years passed and I still sometimes woke up in the middle of the night, instinctively airing out to his side of the bed. James worked as a security consultant for a large insurance company. He assessed risks, tested defenses, recommended improvements. It was ironic. A man who spent a lifetime concerned with the safety of others couldn't protect himself from his own heart. Overcoming a moment's weakness, I opened the office door. The smell of old books, leather, and the light aroma of tobacco. James loved his pipe, immediately enveloped me. I walked slowly inside, running my hand over the polished surface of the desk. Everything was just as it had been when my husband was alive. Stacks of professional magazines, a collection of antique castles, hishabi, and photographs of our family in simple wooden frames. I began dusting off the shelves, gently touching each item, remembering the stories associated with them. There's the model of the first castle James took apart unassembled when he was 12. There's the Distinguished Service Medal he received in the army. And here is a small wooden box he brought back from a business trip to Switzerland the year before he died. I took the box in my hands, ran my fingers over the skillful carvings. James kept his treasures, the little things he called, the things he held dear to his heart. A dried flower from our first date, a pebble from the beach where we'd spent our honeymoon, a miniature framed photograph of me. As I opened the box, I smiled at these memorabilia. Then my gaze fell on something metallic, hidden under the velvet lining. I carefully lifted their fabric and discovered a small set of thin metal tools, lockpicks. I recognized them immediately, even though I'd only seen them a few times in my life. James had shown me how to use them, explaining that it was important for a security consultant to know not only how to protect, but how to overcome a defense. You know, Mary, he said with a twinkle in his eye, every lock can be opened if you know its construction and have the right tools. It's all about patience and finger sensitivity. As I held the lockpicks in my hand, a sudden thought struck me. What if I could open the new locks Randy had installed? What if it gained my freedom without waiting for my son and daughter-in-law to return? The thought was both frightening and exciting. I hadn't used lockpicks since James had shown me how they worked. and I wasn't sure I'd be able to remember the ins and outs. Besides, the new locks were probably harder than the ones I practiced on years ago. But what choice did I have? Stay locked up for another 11 days, waiting for my jailer's to return? No, I had to at least try. I tucked the lockpicks into the pocket, off me housecoat, and continued cleaning. But my thoughts were far away. A plan was beginning to form in my head. That evening, after dinner, heated lasagna from the delivery portioned out by Laurel. I pulled out the lockpicks and examined them closely. The set was compact. 5 thin metal tools of different shapes, each with a specific purpose. I vaguely remembered what James had called them: tensioner, hook, diamond, semicircle, snake. First, I decided to practice on some old padlocks from my husband's collection. Taking a simple padlock, I tried to remember the sequence of operations. A tensioner is inserted into the bottom of the keyhole and turned slightly, creating pressure. Then, another tool, a hook or snake, is used to manipulate the pins inside the lock. My first attempts were clumsy. My fingers, once nimble from years of teaching drawing, had become less sensitive with age. I couldn't pick up subtle clicks that meant the pin was falling into place. After an hour of unsuccessful attempts, my hands began to shake from exertion, and my eyes began to water from fatigue. But I didn't give up. Every time I wanted to quit, I remembered Ree's words, "No one should see you. Just sit there until we get back from the cruise." And the anger gave me strength. On the second day of practice, I felt progress. The old padlock gave in, clicking after a few minutes of manipulation. The joy of this small success was indescribable. I moved on to the more difficult locks in James' collection, working methodically with each one, remembering and honing my skills. By the evening of the 4th day of confinement, I decided I was ready to try the lock on the front door. After waiting until dark, I didn't want the neighbors to see the hallway light at an ungodly hour and suspect something amiss. I got down to business. The new lock was more complicated than I'd expected. It was a cylinder lock with a pin system that required extreme precision. I spent nearly 2 hours trying to find the right position for each pin. My hands aching, sweat beating on my forehead. Just when I was ready to give up, something inside the lock clicked and the mechanism turned. The door opened. I stood in the doorway, staring out at the dark street, not believing my eyes. The cool night air touched my face, bringing the smell of rain and freedom. I took a step forward, then another, finding myself on my own porch for the first time in 4 days. The world outside the house seemed vast and a little frightening. The silence of Horn Lake at night was broken only by the rustle of leaves and the occasional passing car in the distance. I inhaled deeply, savoring the feeling of spaciousness, but the euphoria was quickly replaced by realism. It was late at night. Not a good time for a 68-year-old woman to be out walking. Besides, I had to learn how to lock Thelic behind me, so no one would suspect my escape. I returned to the house, carefully closed the door, and spent another hour practicing locking and unlocking the new lock. By morning, I had mastered the skill enough to feel confident. The plan was finalized. Tomorrow, after the social worker's visit, I would go for a walk, a short walk, an hour or two, to get used to my newfound freedom, and not to arouse a suspicion. If someone called the house phone, Mrs. Donovan arrived at 10 o'clock sharp, as promised. She was a pleasant middle-aged woman with kind eyes and quiet movements. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Tremblay?" she asked, checking my blood pressure. "Fine, considering the circumstances," I replied with a slight smile. "Your son is very worried." "About you," she remarked, jotting down a statement in her notebook. "He called yesterday asking if I needed to increase the frequency of my visits." I almost laughed. Of course, Randy was worried not about me, but about his plan working perfectly. That won't be necessary, I said calmly. I'm doing just fine on my own. My food delivery is running smoothly, and I'm taking my medications on schedule. Mrs. Donovan nodded with visible relief. Apparently, she had enough people to take care of without me. If you need anything between my visits, just give me a call, she said, getting ready to leave. The number is on the list. Your sister-in-law left. After she left, I waited half an hour in case she forgot something and came back, then changed into a simple dress, threw on a light coat, and took the lockpicks and went to the front door. The lock was quicker than it had been the day before. I stepped out onto the porch, carefully locked the door behind me, and descended the steps. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I felt like a runaway, a schoolgirl who had escaped from class, a criminal who had slipped away from custody. The thought of being 68-year-old Meredith Tremblay, forced to sneak down my own street, was both absurd and bitter. I decided to go to the park. It was only 3 blocks from my house and had been my favorite place to walk before Randy had restricted my movements. It was a sunny day, despoteth forecast of rain, and many Horn Lake residents were out enjoying the cool fall day. In the park, I sat on a bench by the pond watching the ducks and enjoying the simple things. The fresh air, the rustling of leaves, the laughter of children from the nearby playground. How little it takes to be happy when you're deprived of even that. Meredith Tremblay, is that you? I turned around at the sound of a familiar voice and saw Pearl Higgins, my old friend and colleague at the school where I taught art. Pearl, a small, energetic woman with a mop of grey hair, had always reminded me of a hummingbird, just as fast, bright, and restless. Pearl, I couldn't help smiling. How glad I am to see you. We hugged and Pearl immediately sat down beside me, scrutinizing me. How are you? I haven't seen you how long? 3 months. Not since Sao went through that, what's his name? Microstroke. Almost 6 months, I corrected. And yes, since then, Randy restricted my outings. Pearl frowned. That's what I thought. Called you several times, but your son always answered that you were resting or couldn't come to the phone. I was beginning to worry. I sighed. Of course, Randy was filtering my calls, deciding who I could and couldn't talk to. Pearl, with her straightforwardness and independent views, was clearly not one of the approved contacts. As you can see, I'm alive and relatively healthy, I said, trying to sound cheerful. I'm just grounded. What do you mean? Pearl frowned even harder, and I told her everything about Randy and Laurel's growing control, about the cruise they'd won, about the new locks, and how I discovered James' lockpicks and learned how to use them. Damn it, Meredith, Pearl exclaimed when I was done. A few bystanders turned at the sound of her voice and she lowered her tone. I mean, that's illegal. He has no right to lock you up, even if he is your son. I know, I nodded. But he's convinced said that he's acting in my best interests, that I can't take care of myself. Pearl snorted. I've known you for 40 years, Meredith. You've always been the most organized and focused of us. One microstroke couldn't change that. Her indignation and faith in me was like a bomb to my soul. For the first time in a long time, someone wasn't looking at me with pity or condescension, but with respect. What are you going to do? Pearl asked. You can't just wait for them to come back and continue to control your life. I don't know, I answered. Honestly, for now, I'm just enjoying being able to get out of the house. But you're right. We need a plan for the future. Pearl thought, tapping her fingers on the bench. You know what? Our book club is meeting tomorrow. You should come. Wemmiss your sharp mind, and you could use the socializing. Plus, we have a new member, Elliot Pierce. He's a retired lawyer who specialized in family law. He might be able to give you some useful advice. I hesitated. On the one hand, the idea of getting out of the house, seeing old friends, socializing with new people was incredibly tempting. On the other hand, the risk of being discovered increased with each trip. Don't worry, Pearl said as if she'd read my mind. We're meeting in the library in the little meeting room. We don't get many people in there except us. And no one will call you at home, I promise. Okay, I decided. What time and where exactly? 2:00 City Library, meeting room on the second floor. Do you remember where that is? I nodded. It was about a 20-minute walk from my house, a manageable distance even for my 68-year-old legs. We talked some more with Pearl about life in Horn Lake, about our mutual acquaintances, about new books. Then I looked at my watch and realized it was time to go back. Another food delivery was coming soon. See you tomorrow, Meredith. Pearl hugged me. Goodbye. And remember, you're not alone. You have friends who will help you. I got home just in time for the delivery guy to show up 10 minutes after. I spent the whole evening in high spirits, looking forward to tomorrow's meeting. For the first time in a long time, I had hope. The next day, I carefully prepared to go out. I picked out my best casual dress, a dark blue one with a small floral pattern that Laurel had somehow miraculously not thrown out when she'd simplified my closet. I styled my hair, even applied light makeup. Looking in the mirror, I was surprised to notice that I looked much younger and more energetic than I had in months. There was a sparkle in my eyes, and my cheeks were slightly flushed with excitement. I left the house at precisely 1:00, making sure there were no strangers on the street who might report my escape to Randy. It took a little longer than I'd expected to get to the library because of my age and my long absence from walking. But I got there on time, went up to the second floor, and found the room I wanted. Pearl saw me as soon as I opened the door and waved happily. Friends, look who's here. Meredith Tremble, our prodigal sheep. There were 10 people in the room, mostly women my age or slightly younger. I recognized a few. Former schoolmates, neighbors, old acquaintances. All of them greeted me with sincere warmth, asked me about my health, and expressed their joy at meeting me. This is the new member I told you about, Pearl said, leading me over to a tall, gay-haired man with a neat beard. Elliot Pierce, former lawyer, current book lover, and literary critic. Elliot smiled and extended his hand to me. He had an open, friendly face with intelligent grey eyes and a network of wrinkles that spoke of a habit of smiling. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Tremblay, he said in a low, well-pitched voice. Pearl has told me a lot about you. Just Meredith, please, I said, shaking his hand. Nice to meet you too. The book club meeting began with a discussion of the last book I'd read, a novel about an old woman in her 70s who traveled around the world against the wishes of her adult children. I hadn't read the book, but topic was so close to my heart that I actively participated in the discussion. It's amazing how Storytime fantasies older people, I remarked at one point. As soon as you reach a certain age, people start treating you like a child, unable to make decisions. I agree. Elliot nodded. In my law practice, I've seen it a lot. Well-intentioned adult children take control of their parents' lives, not realizing that they are robbing them of their dignity and autonomy. That's exactly what's happening to Meredith, Pearl interjected, giving me an apologetic look. I'm sorry, honey, but I told Elliot about your situation. I thought he might be able to help. I didn't mind. After all, I was hoping to get some advice from a former lawyer myself. After the formal part of the meeting, when the participants broke into small groups for informal socializing, Elliot sat down with me. Pearl told me about your situation, Meredith, he said without preamble. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a few questions. I nodded, and Elliot started asking me details about my health before and after the microstroke, about Ree's gradual increase in control, about his decision to lock me in the house for the duration of the cruise. He listened intently, occasionally, making notes in a small notebook he pulled from his jacket pocket. What your son is doing is illegal, he said when I finished my story. It's called unlawful imprisonment, and it's a felony, even if it's done in good faith. Besides, you have the right to self-determination until you are declared incompetent by a court of law, which I understand has not happened. What are you suggesting? I asked. I don't want to sue my own son. Elliot rubbed his beard thoughtfully. I understand how you feel, that you need to protect your rights before things get worse. I suggest a comprehensive approach. He pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began to write. First, you need to get an independent medical examination. A friend of mine, Dr. Sanders, is an experienced neurologist who specializes in elderly patients. You will be able to evaluate your condition objectively without bias. I nodded and Elliot continued. Second, legal advice. I can help you draw up documents to prove your capacity and right to make your own decisions. It might be worth reviewing your will and powers of attorney, making sure they reflect your current wishes and not give too much power to your son. Third, he flipped the sheet. A support system. You need people who can validate your ability to live independently. Neighbors, friends, perhaps regular help around the house, but on your terms, not imposed from the outside. Elliot's plan was logical and comprehensive. It offered not just a fight against Randy, but an alternative to his control. A system that would provide me with security and support, but maintain my independence. What do you think? Elliot asked, finishing his explanation. That's exactly what I need, I replied gratefully. But I'm not sure I can organize it all in the time I have left. Randy will be back in a week. We'll help. Pearl intervened, coming over to us with a cup of tea. You have a whole army of support now, Mrs. Tremblay. Don't we friends? She looked around the room, and several people nodded vigorously. I felt a lump come up in my throat from gratitude, from relief, from the realization that I was no longer alone in my struggle. Thank you, I said, trying to hold back tears to all of you. The morning started with a phone call. I was just eating breakfast when there was the sharp sound of the old-fashioned machine Randy had left me instead of my cell phone. It was my son on the other end of the line. Mom, it's Ma. How are you? His voice sounded carefree with a hint of that artificial cheerfulness that people often use to mask anxiety. There was the sound of waves and distant voices in the background. It's all right, Randall, I said, trying to keep my voice normal. How was your vacation? It was great. We went on a coral reef tour yesterday, and today we're going to a winery. Laurel is raving about the local food. I listened to his enthusiastic account of the cruise, nodding even though he couldn't see me and mechanically responding in the right places. A mixture of bitterness and determination seemed inside me. While they were enjoying their vacation, I was planning my release. Is the social worker coming? Is the food delivery working fine? Randy asked after another colorful description of the Caribbean sunset. Yes, everything is on schedule, I replied. Mrs. Donovan was in yesterday to check my blood pressure. She said it was fine. That's great. I could hear the relief in his voice. We were really worried that you might, forget to take your meds or heat your food wrong. I gritted my teeth, holding back the urge to tell him that not only was I warming up the food correctly, but I was also getting out of the house. He turned into a prison socializing with friends and planning legal action against his vigilante behavior. I'm doing fine, Randy, I said instead. Don't worry and enjoy your vacation. After talking to my son, I said about packing. Today was the big day, the first step in my plan to regain my independence. Elliot had made an appointment with Dr. Sanders, his neurologist friend, for 10 o'clock in the morning. Pearl was to pick me up by car at 9:30. I dressed carefully, choosing a strict pantsuit that I'd managed to hide from Laurel's sorting. I gathered all my medical records I could find, my hospital discharge papers from my microstroke, the results of my latest tests, a list of the medications I was taking. At exactly 9:30. Pearl's blue Toyota pulled up in front of the house. I got out, quickly locking the door behind me, and sat in the front seat. Ready for battle? Pearl asked with a mischievous grin as she pulled into the driveway. More than ever, I replied, buckling my seat belt. Dr. Sanders' clinic was located in a new medical center on the outskirts of Horn Lake. The modern glass and concrete building looked imposing, but inside it was cozy and friendly. Elliot was already waiting for us in the reception area, leafing through a medical journal. Good morning, ladies. He greeted us standing up. Dr. Sanders is ready to see us right away. He cleared out the entire morning. Dr. William Sanders appeared to be a short, full-bodied man with shrewd dark eyes and a neat grey beard. He greeted me warmly as if we were old acquaintances, and offered me a comfortable chair across from his desk. Elliot told me your situation, Mrs. Tremblay. He began, reviewing the papers I'd brought with him. I have to say that I find your son's actions professionally perplexing. A microstroke is a serious condition, of course, but it's no reason for such a drastic restriction of freedom. I nodded, relieved that I was finally being taken seriously. I'll be doing a full neurological exam today, the doctor cautioned. It will include an evaluation of cognitive function, memory, coordination, speech, and other aspects. It will take about 3 hours. If you don't mind, I'd also like to do an MRI of their brain to compare with the results that were obtained immediately after the microstroke. I agree to all the necessary procedures, I replied firmly. The next few hours passed in intense tests and examinations. Dr. Sanders was thorough and attentive, yet friendly. He explained each test, its purpose, and what exactly it was evaluating. I did my best, realizing how important these results were to my future. After all vet procedures were completed, we reconvened in the doctor's office. Pearl and Elliot, who had been waiting for me in the waiting room all this time, joined us. Well, Mrs. Tremblay, Dr. Sanders said, reviewing the test results, I can safely say that you are in excellent shape for your age and the microstroke KO suffered. Your cognitive function is virtually intact. Your memory is good. Your coordination is normal. Yes, there are some age-related changes, but they are not out of the norm and certainly not a reason to limit your independence. I felt the tension I had been carrying Garen for months begin to let go. My suspicions were confirmed. I wasn't incapacitated. Old woman Randy and Laurel had tried to make me out to be. I will prepare a detailed report, the doctor cautioned, stating that you are fully capable of living independently with minimal support. By minimal support, I mean regular medical checkups and perhaps assistance with heavy physical tasks. But locking you in the house, that's completely medically unreasonable. Thank you, doctor, I said, feeling tears of relief come to my eyes. You have no idea how much this means to me. I can only guess. He replied gently. Losing independence is one of the biggest fears for seniors. Sometimes it is medically necessary, but much more often it is unnecessary because of the fears and concerns of relatives. After the clinic, Elliot took us to the office of his colleague, attorney Miles Corian, who specializes in elder rights. Miles turned out to be an energetic middle-aged man with a penetrating eye and fast speech. What your son did, Mrs. Tremblay, he said after I'd outlined my story, is unlawful imprisonment, and it falls under the penal code. Even if he acted in good faith, the law is on your side. I don't want to sue Randy, I replied. But I need to protect myself from further attempts at control. Miles nodded, making notes in his notebook. There are several legal mechanisms we can use. First, a declaration of capacity supported by Dr. Sanders's report. Second, a review of your will and any powers of attorney that may give your son too much power over your affairs. Third, we can prepare an advanced medical directive that clearly defines who can make what decisions in the event that you do become incapacitated in the future. We spent 2 hours in Miles's office, carefully going over each document. By the end of the meeting, I had a new will specifying the terms of Rice inheritance, a medical directive appointing Pearl as my power of attorney in the event I became incapacitated, and a statement affirming my right to live independently and make decisions about my life. These documents are legally binding, Miles explained, handing me a folder of copies. If your son tried to challenge them, he'd have to prove in court that you were incapacitated when you signed them. And Dr. Sanders' report made that nearly impossible. I felt strangely refreshed as I left the lawyer's office. It was as if the weight of months of uncertainty and helplessness had begun to fall off my shoulders. But there was still much work to be done. The next item in our plan is a support system, Elliot said as we got into his car. You need to prove that you can live on your own with a reliable network of people around you who will help you when you need it, but won't control your every move. We went to Mrs. Bennet, my neighbour, with whom I had always been on good terms before Randy started limiting my contacts. She was a widow like me, but a little younger, about 60. Active and outgoing, she always invited me to her garden gatherings and I shared home baking recipes with her. Mrs. Bennet was genuinely pleased to see me and outraged to learn of Ree's actions. Of course I'll help, dear, she said as she poured us tea. We could go grocery shopping together twice a week. I have a car. It wouldn't be a problem, and I'd love the company. Shopping alone is so boring. I gratefully accepted her offer. We agreed on the days and times of our shopping trips together, and I felt another piece of the puzzle of my independent life falling into place. After visiting Mrs. Bennet, we drove to a technology center for seniors that Elliot had heard about from his daughter who worked in IT. The center offered classes on how to use modern technology to help seniors maintain independence. We can install some useful applications on your computer and future smartphone, explained a young woman named Heather, a counselor at the center. For example, a program to remind you to take your medications, an app for ordering groceries with delivery, emergency call systems for help. I listened to her explanation with growing interest. Technology had never been my strong suit. I preferred traditional methods, but now I was ready to learn anything that would help me maintain my independence. In addition, Heather continued, we have a support group for people facing similar challenges. They meet once a week to discuss their difficulties, share their experiences, and support each other. Perhaps it would be helpful for you to join. By the evening, I was feeling both encouraged and exhausted at the same time. We had accomplished so much in one day. A medical exam, a legal consultation, an arrangement with a neighbor, an introduction to technology solutions, and signing up for a support group. That plan was taking shape. But I realized this was just the beginning. I have to get home before the social worker gets here, I said, glancing at my watch. Mrs. Donovan should be here at 5. Elliot nodded and drove me back. On the way, we discussed the next steps. I had to keep learning lockpicks so I could leave the house freely, attend support group and technology classes, and keep in touch with Dr. Sanders for regular checkups. The most important thing is not to arouse the suspicion of the social worker and your son. Elliot reminded me as he stopped the car around the corner from my house. If they found out about your escapades early on, They might take even stricter measures. I nodded, realizing the gravity of the situation. I had to be very careful to get home on time, to leave no trace of my escapades. "Thank you," I said, shaking Elliot's hand, "for everything you do for me." "You're welcome," he smiled. "I just can't stand injustice, especially when it's disguised as caring." I got home 20 minutes before Mrs. Donovan arrived. I quickly changed into home clothes, arranged my things as if I'd been at home all day, and even had time to put the kettle on for tea. The social worker arrived right on schedule. She checked my blood pressure, asked me how I was feeling, what I was eating, what I was taking. I answered calmly and confidently, without betraying my excitement. "You look better than you did last time," Mrs. Donovan said, as she recorded the thermometer readings. "More lively. I'm trying to keep my spirits up," I replied with a slight smile. "Reading books, watching old movies, sometimes being alone can be useful. It gives you time to think about life." She nodded with slight surprise, clearly not expecting such a philosophical response to confinement. After she left, I allowed myself to relax and reflect on the day's events. The next few days followed a similar rhythm. I would leave the house with my lockpicks, meet with Elliot, Pearl, and other aides, attend technology classes, and a support group, and then return home before the food delivery came or the social worker visited. At the support group, I met people whose stories were similar to mine. Harold, whose daughter moved him into a nursing home against his will. Etty, whose son handled her finances by giving her pocket money as if she were a child. Lillian, who was persuaded by relative Esto sell her house and move in with them without regard for her wishes. The most frustrating thing, Lillian said at one of the meetings, is that they really believe they are doing the right thing. They don't see it as controlling or disrespectful. They call it caring, and genuinely don't understand why we're assist. I nodded, recognizing my situation in her words. Randy wasn't our Verlaine. He really did care about me, but his concern turned into control, and his control turned into incarceration. In my technology courses, I learned several useful apps. A calendar with medication reminders, a program for ordering groceries, an emergency call for help app that could connect me with emergency services, or selected contacts at the touch of a button. Heather, the center's counselor, was patient and understanding. She didn't rush me, explained everything in simple words without technical jargon, and was always willing to repeat the explanation if I didn't understand something. "You're a fast learner, Mrs. Tremblay," she said after our fourth class. "Many people your age take much longer to master these applications." I smiled, feeling unexpectedly proud. At 68, I was mastering new technologies, making plans, fighting for my independence, while my 42-year-old son thought I was practically incapacitated. With Mrs. Bennett, we made several grocery shopping trips together. She proved to be a wonderful companion, cheerful, energetic, with a sharp mind and sense of humor. We discussed books, shared memories of our late husbands, and talked about gardening and cooking. After so many months of limited socializing, these conversations were like a breath of fresh air for me. Meredith," she said one day, as we drove back from the supermarket, "I always thought you were one of the most collected and organized women in our neighborhood. I can't imagine how your son could think you weren't capable of taking care of yourself." "Fear," I replied as I helped her unload the bags from the car. Randy had always been afraid of change, of uncertainty. Mimicrostroke scared him, made him see me vulnerable. And Laurel, I think she just sees me as a liability. "Well, they'll get a surprise soon enough," Mrs. Bennett said with a wink, "when they come back and find that you've not only survived without their control, but you've completely reorganized your life." I smiled, imagining the look on Ree's face when he found out about all the changes. But the smile quickly faded, replaced by concern. I didn't know how he would react. Would he accept my decision, or would he try to exert even tighter control? Elliot reassured me, telling Meth that legally I was protected, that the new documents gave me the right to self-determination, that Dr. Sanders' report confirmed my legal capacity, that I knew my son. You were stubborn and thought you always knew best. 2 days before Randy and Laurel turned, Elliot, Pearl, Miles and I gathered at Pearl's house for a final discussion of the plan. On the table were all the documents we had prepared, the medical report, the legal papers, the schedule for my new support system. So, Miles said, reviewing the paperwork, when your son and daughter-in-law turn, you will present them with a fait accompli. Not only have you survived their absence without problems, but you have organized your life so that you can maintain your independence with the necessary support. If they insist on continued control, Elliot added, you will show them these documents and explain that you are prepared to take illegal action if they do not accept your decision. And if they try to challenge your legal capacity? Pearl asked, always thinking of worst-case scenarios. They'd have to prove in court that Mrs. Tremblay is incompetent. Miles answered. And with Dr. Sanders' report and the testimony of all of you about her activity and clarity of mind in the last few days, that would be next to impossible. I listened to their discussion, feeling a strange mixture of determination and fear. I didn't want conflict with my son. I didn't want to threaten him with a lawsuit or a severed relationship, but I also couldn't continue to live in a cage, even if gilded with care. There's something else, I said, as the discussion began to die down. I want you all at my house when Randy and Laurel return, not just as witnesses, but as moral support. They looked at each other for a moment, and then Pearl nodded decisively. Of course, I'll be with you. All of us, including Dr. Sanders if he can. I'll call him, Elliot said. I think he'll agree. He was very indignant about your situation. When I got home that evening, I sat in the chair for a long time, looking at the pictures on the mantelpiece. James young and smiling, Randy in his graduation robe. The three of us at a picnic years ago, a happy family that had slowly disintegrated. First with James's death, now with this conflict between my son and me. I didn't know how our confrontation would end, but I was sure of one thing. I would no longer live in a cage created by other people's fears and control. I deserved dignity and the right to decide for myself how to live out my remaining years. With that thought in mind, I went to bed preparing for my last day of freedom before Randy and Laurel returned from their Caribbean cruise. The day of Randy and Laurel's return came unexpectedly quickly. 2 weeks that initially seemed like an eternity of confinement flew by in a whirlwind of activity and preparation. I woke up early at first light and immediately felt excitement mixed with determination. Today was going to be the day everything was going to be decided. Randy had called the day before, letting me know that their plane would land at 11 in the morning, and they would be at me place by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That gave us plenty of time to get ready. I started by cleaning the house, not because I wanted to impress my son and daughter-in-law, but so they couldn't pick on my ability to keep things tidy. Then I made a light lunch. Sandwiches, salad, homemade lemonade. Cooking always calmed me down, allowed me to focus on simple, understandable actions. At exactly noon, my Allies beckoned to arrive. Pearl was the first to arrive with a basket of fresh buns. Nervous? She asked, helping me set out the teacups. Of course I am, I answered honestly. This is my son, Pearl, my only child. I don't want a war with him, but I can't go on living by his rules. She squeezed my hand, insolent support. Pearl, with her 3 grown children, was well aware of the complexity of parent-child relationships. especially when the roles begin to change. Soon Elliot and Dr. Sanders arrived, then Miles with a folder of papers, and finally, Mrs. Bennet, my neighbour, who had become an important part of my new support system. They settled into the living room talking softly, creating an air of quiet, confidence that helped me cope with my growing anxiety. At 4:02, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I looked out the window and saw a cab with Randy and Laurel getting out, tanned and rested. They looked happy, carefree, like I hadn't seen them in a long time. Randy paid the driver. Laurel fixed her hire and they headed for the door, unaware of what awaited them inside. I took a deep breath, met my eyes with Elliot, one nodded encouragingly, and went to open the door. "Mum." Randy smiled broadly when he saw me. "It's so good to see you. You're looking good." He hugged me, and for a moment I felt a rush of tenderness for my son. Despite everything that had happened, I loved him. "Hello, Randall," I said, pulling away. "Hello, Laurel. How was the cruise?" "Just fine," Laurel said with the fake politeness she always used when talking to me. "The Caribbean is amazing. We brought you some souvenirs." "How nice," I said in a neutral tone. "Come into the living room, Dot, we have guests." Randy frowned, clearly surprised. "Guests? What guests? How did they get in the house?" I didn't answer, just turned and walked into the living room, knowing they would follow me. When Randy and Laurel entered the room and saw the 5 people sitting there, their faces expressed such amazement that in another situation I would have laughed. "What's going on?" Randy asked, shifting his gaze from me to the crowd. "Who are all these people? How did they get in?" "I let them in," I answered calmly. "Randy, Laurel, let me introduce you to Pearl Higgins, an old friend of mine. Elliot Pierce, a former lawyer. Dr. William Sanders, a neurologist. Miles Corin, a practicing attorney. And Mrs. Bennet, my neighbor. They've helped me over these past 2 weeks to understand and change some things in my life." Laurel had gone pale despite her Caribbean tan, and Randy looked like he'd been kicked in the butt. "Did you leave the house?" he finally squeezed out. "But how locks?" "Your father worked in security, Randall," I said. "He left me some tools and knowledge. Lockpicks are surprisingly useful. You know, you picked the locks." Now he looked less shocked than outraged. "Mom, do you realize how dangerous that is? What if something had happened to you while you were out? What if something had happened to me while I was locked in the house?" I parried. "What if there had been a fire, gas, or a heart attack? Your locks weren't protecting me, Randy. They were robbing me of my freedom and my dignity." Laurel, having gotten over the initial shock, went on the offensive. "Meredith, this is highly irresponsible. We cared about you. We cared about your safety. And you, if I may." Dr. Sanderson interjected, rising from his seat. "I'd like to clarify something. I performed a full neurological examination on Mrs. Tremblay a few days ago. The results show that she is fully capable of living independently with minimal support. The microstroke she suffered has not significantly affected her cognitive function or decision-making ability. Since when have you been seeing a neurologist?" Randy turned to me, ignoring the doctor. "And who are all these people anyway? How do you know them?" "If you'll excuse me," Miles stood up. "I'm Mrs. Tremblay's attorney. Over the past 2 weeks, we have prepared a number of legal documents which I would like to present to you." He opened his folder and pulled out several papers. First, a declaration of capacity supported by a medical report from Dr. Sanders. Second, a revised will. Third, a medical directive appointing Mrs. Higgins as trustee in the event of Mrs. Tremblay's incapacity. Randy looked like he'd been betrayed. He turned to me and I saw the pain in his eyes that stabbed me in the heart. Mom, why? I've always cared for you. Always wanted the best for you. I know, son. My voice softened. I don't doubt your intentions, but caring is not control. You locked me in my own house. You've taken away my cell phone, restricted my computer, forbidden me to go outside. That's not caring, Randy. That's prison. You went behind our backs. Laurel intervened, eyes flashing. While we were resting, believing you were all right, you organized this. She circled the room. It's manipulation, Meredith. Pure manipulation. No, Laurel. I looked her straight in the eye. Manipulation is when you and Randy convinced me that I was incompetent. When you made decisions for me without asking my opinion. When you turned my house into a cage. I just got back what you took from me. My freedom and my dignity. There was a heavy silence in the room. Randy stared at the floor. Laurel pressed her lips into a thin line. My friends and counselors sat in silence, realizing that this was a moment between me and my family. I've rewritten my will, I finally said. Randy, you have always been and will remain my sole heir. But no, there's a condition. You will only inherit if you stop trying to control my life. If you continue, everything goes to the Senior Citizens Fund. Are you blackmailing me? Randy looked up, anger in his eyes. Are you using the money to make me comply? No, son. I'm just setting boundaries and I'm giving you the choice to respect them or not. And if we say no? Laurel asked, crossing her arms across her chest. If we think you still need our help and control, then I'll file for unlawful imprisonment, I said firmly. And I'll file a restraining order against you from coming near me in my home. I don't want that, Laurel. I want a relationship with both of you, but on my terms, not yours. Randy looked shocked. He looked at Dr. Sanders, then at Miles, as if trying to find a catch. It can't be. He muttered. Mom couldn't have organized all this on her own. You, he turned to Elliot. Yao took advantage of her vulnerability too. Stop it, Randall. I cut him off sharply. Don't blame others for my decisions. Yes, I had help and I'm grateful for it. But the decision was mine. I don't want to live in a cage, even if you think it's for my own good. I'm worried about you, Mom. Randy sounded desperate. You've changed since with microstroke. You forget things. You get lost. I don't want anything to happen to you. And I appreciate the concern. I soften my tone, but it doesn't have to turn into control. It propose a compromise. I'll live on my own, but with a support system. Mrs. Bennett will help me shop. I've installed apps for medication reminders and emergency calls for help. I will have regular checkups with Dr. Sanders. And I will keep you informed about my health and well-being. And if that's not a now, Randy asked, if you get lost again or forget something important, then we'll deal with problems as they arise, I replied. Like adults through dialogue and mutual respect, not coercion and control. Laurel, who had been watching our conversation in silence all this time, suddenly laughed, short and unhappy. You're bluffing, Meredith, she said. You would never sue. Your own son. You're not breaking up with us. You're just trying to manipulate this situation. I gave her a long look. I hope it doesn't come to that, Laurel. But if you make me choose between my freedom and my relationship with you, I'll choose freedom every time. Randy seemed to finally realize the gravity of the situation. He slumped down in his chair, looking tired and confused. I didn't know what to say, Mom, he mumbled. I just wanted to protect you. I know, son. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. And I'm grateful for that. But I don't need protection at the cost of my freedom and dignity. I need respect and support. Elliot coughed tactfully. Perhaps we should leave you alone for a family conversation, he suggested, rising. We've laid out their facts, presented the documents. This is a family matter now. The others nodded in agreement and began to pack up. I walked them to the door, silently, thanking each of them for their support. When everyone was gone, I returned to the living room where Randy and Laurel sat in tense silence. So, I said, sitting down across from them. Let's talk like adults. What's there to talk about? Laurel exclaimed. You've already decided everything. You've prepared the paperwork, found a lawyer, even rewritten the will. All behind our backs. Just like you decided to lock me in the house, I parried. Behind my back without my consent? Laurel opened her mouth to reply, but Randy stopped her with a hand on her knee. She's right, Laurel, he said quietly. We really did decide this on our own without asking her opinion. Laurel looked indignant but remained silent. Randy turned to me, and in his eyes I saw a mixture of pain, confusion, and maybe a glimmer of understanding. Mom, I don't know if I can just let go of control. I'm too scared for you. I'm not asking you to stop worrying, I replied softly. I'm asking you to respect my right to choose, even if you don't agree with it. I'm not asking you to see me as a helpless child, but as an adult with experience and wisdom. What if you get lost again or forget to take your medication? Then I'll use the support system I've created. I'll call Mrs. Bennett or use the emergency app or consult with Dr. Sanders. I know my limitations. Randy, I'm not denying that the microstroke has affected me, but I'm not helpless. We talked for a long time. Randy asked questions about my new support system, about the doctor's appointments, about the apps I had mastered. Laurel was silent most of the time, only occasionally inserting a skeptical remark. I patiently answered, explained, persuaded. Gradually, the tension in the room began to subside. Randy seemed to be beginning, if not to accept, at least to consider my point of view. Laurel remained wary, but no longer openly hostile. I can't promise that it will be easy for me to let go of control, Randy finally said. But I'll try for you, Mom, and for us. That's all I'm asking, I said with relief. Just try to see me not as a problem to be solved, but as a person who deserves respect. Laurel sighed, clearly not fully convinced, but deciding to back off for now. I hope you realize what you're doing, Meredith, she said, and that it's your responsibility, not ours. That's exactly what I want, Laurel, I nodded. The right to make decisions and take responsibility for them. We ended the conversation, not in complete agreement, but in a kind of truce. Randy and Laurel agreed to respect my autonomy, as long as I had regular checkups with my doctor and maintained a safety net. I in turn promised to keep them informed of my health and well-being. When they left to their house without taking me with them, which was already a small victory, I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at my garden, at the street, at the neighbors' houses. The world was open to me again, not as a dangerous place to be avoided, but as a space of possibilities. I didn't know how our relationship with Randy and Laurel would develop next. Would my son be able to truly let go of control? Would Laurel accept me as a full member of the family, and not a burden? Would there be more conflict and misunderstandings? But one thing I knew for sure, I would no longer allow anyone, even in good faith, to rob me of my freedom and dignity. I found the strength to fight, found support and new friends, and created a system that allowed me to live independently, but not in isolation. Pearl called me that evening. So, did everything go okay after we left? She asked with concern in her voice. As normal as possible, I answered. Not perfect, but we're moving in the right direction. I'm so proud of you, Meredith, she said. You reminded me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. After the conversation, I poured myself a glass of wine, A smell luxury that Randy didn't approve of because of my medication, but which Dr. Sanders thought was perfectly acceptable in moderation. I raised my glass in a silent toast to James, who had always believed in my strength, to my new friends who had supported me in my time of need, and to myself, a 68-year-old woman who had discovered that the fight for freedom and dignity didn't end with age. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I looked to the future without fear, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would meet them as the master of my own destiny, not as a prisoner of other people's fears and train.